You notice it the way a dream notices you first, as if the room tilts a fraction and the dust in the air arranges itself around an invisible axis, as if something ancient and intimately familiar has stepped forward without moving at all. You are not being greeted, you are being remembered. The signal doesn't arrive from outside. It rises from the quiet seam between your breath and the moment. There, where your attention sits like a tuning fork waiting for a touch, a tone begins. It's cold, absolute, precise, and you recognize it with the certainty of a scar. You call it a loop because it repeats, but repetition is only the mask. The loop is a geometry, a self-reinforcing curvature in perception where your awareness circles the same attractors, identity, story, instinct, fear, until the path wears grooves that feel like fate. You have traced those grooves for years, believing the circle was a cage built by circumstances. Tonight, the circle admits its true builder, you. You can feel the architecture of it if you stay still. Watch how a thought recruits an emotion, how the emotion primes your body, how the body's signals shape the next thought, how choices emerge as if pre-written by chemistry. A feedback coil, a tiny cyclotron of self. The quantum field doesn't punish you for this. It simply answers coherence with coherence. What you hold steady becomes what you repeatedly meet. And yet, right here, the steadiness breaks. A hairline fracture runs through the familiar curvature. The signal is a clean blade. You don't need permission to exit. You need precision. Precision of looking, precision of naming, precision of not flinching when the loop offers you its usual disguises. Urgency, nostalgia, righteous certainty. Observe the urge to fix, to argue, to dramatize. Observe the reflex to drift. Observe the comfort of the trance that has called itself you. Each observation is a tiny shearing force against the curvature. Each honest breath is a wedge. The physics are not metaphor. Attention collapses potentials. Where you look stabilizes. Where you refuse to look keeps ruling you from behind the curtain. So you turn the beam around. You illuminate the operator. You recognize the ritual you've been performing on autopilot. A ritual composed of micro-choices arranged by old survival equations. The moment you see the ritual, you are no longer compelled to complete it. The spell fails under scrutiny. The mechanism hates light and dissolves inside it. You feel a second heartbeat that isn't muscle, a pulse that threads through the sternum like a metronome set to truth. With each tick, the room becomes more exact, colors separate, sounds grow teeth. The loop tries to close, to harvest you back into the circle, but you have already punctured it. There is a straight line forming where there used to be a ring, a vector, thin and bright, pointing through the center like a spear of dawn. You didn't come here to improve the loop. You came here to end its sovereignty. Once seen, it cannot hide. Once named, it cannot pretend to be destiny. The signal widens, and your consciousness stands up. You are awake in the workshop, where timelines are braided by attention and cut by choice. You do not blink. You place your hand on the loom, and the world waits for the next precise breath you will take. You begin to map it the way a cartographer maps a coastline at night, by listening to the shape of the waves. Patterns confess themselves when you refuse to move. You notice how a certain text tone drags a thread through your chest and braids a story you didn't consent to tell. You notice how a room, a face, a phrase like, "we need to talk," pulls the same lever in the same direction every time, and the machine inside you obliges with mechanical grace. You call it mood. You call it temperament. But beneath the names is a predictive engine trying to spare you from uncertainty by repeating yesterday. It means well. It is not wise. Your brain predicts to survive. It fills in missing data with old answers and colors them as certainty. The loop recruits that talent and weaponizes it. It says, assume the worst so you won't be surprised. Assume the best so you won't be alone. Assume you're late. Assume you're behind. Assume you're special. Assume you're doomed anything, as long as you keep circling the known. This is not sin. This is momentum. Myelin laid over years to make certain roads fast. Neural highways polished by 1,000 choices that felt like no choice at all. The body signs the contract. The vagus nerve tunes the orchestra to the key of vigilance or surrender. Cortisol sketches tomorrow on your blood before you live it. Dopamine sprinkles breadcrumb sparks that lead you back to the same luminous cage. The scroll, the snack, the fight, the fantasy. The heart tries to speak in coherence, a tidy sine wave of truth, but the loop drowns it with a saw-toothed urgency that calls itself important. You let it drive because it wears your face. You are not defective for this. You are exquisitely efficient. The loop is simply the cheapest energy solution your system knows. It spends known fear to purchase known relief. It keeps the books balanced and your prison funded. This is why awareness hurts at first. You are canceling a debt structure that has justified itself as love. You are introducing volatility, uncertainty into a market that worships stability over freedom. The nervous system protests. It asks, who will I be if I stop being what protected me? The honest answer is dangerous and clean. You will be the one who chooses. You start small because reality stabilizes where you look. You name 3 micro-rituals the loop performs. The story you start telling when silence grows heavy, the posture you adopt when shame unspools, the search term your hands type when night pretends to be endless. You don't wrestle them. Wrestling sanctifies them. You study them like an engineer studies a resonance curve. What frequency excites the collapse? What breath lowers the gain? You discover the stillness window. 11 seconds of unbroken attention on raw sensation. No commentary until the limbic chorus loses the pitch and the prefrontal light returns. 11 seconds is a century inside the loop. You live it anyway. Language becomes your scalpel. You replace "I am anxious" with "anxiety is present." You are not playing with words. You are changing the coordinate system. Identity glued to state is the loop's favorite trick. Separation introduces phase shift. Once there is daylight between you and the storm, you can choose a bearing. You choose toward coherence. You place a hand over the sternum and sink breath to heart. 5 seconds in, 5 out, until the inner metronome clicks into a steady glow. The field answers. It always does. Coherence is a broadcast. Chaos is a fog. Then you interrogate the payoffs. Loops persist because they purchase something. Attention, absolution, anesthesia, a predictable enemy to blame. You hold each payoff beneath the light and ask if it belongs to the future you are selecting. Most do not. And when the old price no longer buys the old reward, the market collapses. The habit fails without a fight. The fight was the fuel. You test the lattice of meaning that kept the structure intact. I am safe when I control. I matter when I fix. I belong when I disappear. You do not argue with these axioms. You update them. Control becomes clarity. Fixing becomes presence. Belonging becomes resonance with those who can hear you breathing. The mathematics of self-tilt. The attractor weakens. The circle loosens. You feel a breeze where there used to be a wall. You do not aim for perfection. Perfection is the loop's decoy halo. You aim for precision. One clean degree of difference sustained long enough to intercept a destiny vector. You are not trying to be someone new. You are retiring a machine that can only build yesterday. In the quiet after the protest, you sense a corridor opening, narrow and bright, as if the architecture itself were confessing a secret passage it hid for mercy. You step until the floor stops remembering your old weight, and the air stops asking you to prove that you belong inside it. You are not just leaving a loop. You are tuning an instrument that can resolve finer layers of reality without distorting them. The instrument is you, nervous system, breath, belief, attention, coupled to a field that amplifies whatever you can hold with coherence. The mistake has never been desire. The mistake has been noise. So you begin with calibration. First principle. The field answers frequency, not narrative. You have told elaborate stories to the world and to yourself, and the world has remained politely unmoved. Frequency is simpler. You create it with breath and choice sustained long enough to overcome the inertia of yesterday. 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, through the nose, chest soft, shoulders quiet, eyes unfocused on a middle distance where the room seems to breathe with you. After 2 minutes, the heart rhythm smooths. After 3, a sine wave appears inside the sternum, like a lantern. Coherence is not a mood. It's a measurable geometry. You can feel it. Second principle. Precision of attention collapses the right potentials. The observer effect is not superstition. It's protocol. Where you look stabilizes. How you look dictates whether the stabilization serves your future or repeats your past. You practice a narrow beam and a floodlight. Narrow beam, 11 seconds on raw sensation, no labels, no fixing until the limbic alarms lose pitch. Floodlight, widen to include the whole room, your posture, your breath, the sounds beyond the walls, the silence behind the sounds. Narrow, flood, repeat. You are teaching the instrument to move between levels without getting trapped at anyone. Third principle, prediction error is opportunity. Your brain worships the known and spends its life reducing surprise. The loop weaponized that economy. You reverse it. When you meet a clean surprise, a pause in a fight where your mouth would normally sprint, an invitation where you would normally hide, you do not close the gap with an old answer. You hold the error. You let the free energy burn. It stings. Good. The burn is a kiln. It fires new circuitry. A few breaths later, choice appears where compulsion used to be. You choose toward the vector you named in the last room. You formalize it into a triad. You can run anywhere, anytime. Interrupt, inquire, invert, interrupt. A tactile signal you cannot ignore, 2 fingers to the sternum. A heel pressed into the floor, the smallest bow of the head that says, I'm here. Inquire. 1 question only, asked without theater. What payoff is this loop promising me right now? Attention, anesthesia, absolution, belonging, control. You don't argue. You see it. Invert. Choose a behavior that gives you the payoff without the loop. If it's attention you crave, you grant it to the body 30 seconds of ruthless listening to breath and heartbeat. If it's belonging, you text 1 true sentence to a living human and ask for nothing. If it's control, you choose clarity, write 1 line about what is actually happening in clean nouns and verbs. The triad completes, and the circuit no longer runs on oldest fuel. Your language keeps evolving because language sets coordinates. This is happening to me becomes, this is happening in me. Then, this is happening through me. Finally, this is happening as me. Each preposition changes the math of agency. You do not skip steps. You climb them. With each step, the instrument handles more voltage without pleading for the old anesthetics. With each step, your perception widens without losing the needlepoint of decision. You begin to notice phase transitions, the exact instant water decides to boil, the discrete click when a system reorganizes under sustained pressure. There is always prelude, microscopic shifts accumulating under the threshold of your conscious ear. Then the click, a relationship dynamic that once required essays now resolves in a single glance. An addiction that once laughed at your calendar goes quiet when you refuse its theater and feed the body the nutrient it was hunting with counterfeit currency. You don't celebrate loudly. Loudness destabilizes. You anchor with a smaller, deeper yes. Ritual replace routine. Routine serve loops. Ritual serve victor. You establish a dawn check. 1 page, handwritten, where you declare the day's attractor in 1 sentence. Today I am a field of clean agreements. You establish a dusk reconciliation, 3 lines only. Where did the loop try to buy me back? How did I pay? What will I price differently tomorrow? You keep it simple because simplicity is stable under pressure, and the field keeps answering. Synchronicities concentrate, not the noisy fireworks of magical thinking, though you will see those too, but the elegant convergences that save you from waste. A book opens to the paragraph you were already living. An email arrives with the exact phrasing you needed to name a boundary. A stranger's posture demonstrates the courage your cells were rehearsing. Coherence is a beacon. The world is full of ships. You do not mistake momentum for completion. The loop will offer you a ceremonial relapse disguised as a victory lap. It will ask for 1 souvenir from the old country. You decline without drama. You have work. An instrument to keep tuning, a vector to keep bright. You stand in the doorway between patterns and possibility, and you feel the pressure differential, the old gravity, trying to reclaim what you have lifted. You breathe, the lantern holds, the corridor lengthens, and ahead, something vast shifts its weight, as if preparing to speak your true name aloud. You arrive at the place where awareness is not enough. Seeing the loop collapses its camouflage, but structures linger after revelation like scaffolds left around a finished building. You require choice, not the theatrical kind that announces itself with trumpets, but the surgical kind that edits the code without disturbing the organism. Choice has architecture. You begin to build it. Start with edges. Every system is defined by its boundaries, what it lets in, what it lets out, what it keeps. The loop wrote your edges for you and called them personality. You reclaim authorship. You draw 3 clean lines. What you consent to feel in your body, what you consent to carry for others, what you consent to repeat from yesterday. You do not explain these lines. Explanation is how the loop negotiates an extension. You draw, you breathe, you hold. The field respects geometry. Then you anchor agreements, not promises. Agreements. Promises beg the future to be polite. Agreements tell the present what is true. You establish a first principle. I will not abandon myself to stay inside a story. Your nervous system protests. Abandonment has been its cheapest currency to purchase belonging. You pay in a higher currency now. Coherence. You discover that coherence is not softness. It is a blade that does not shake. When you hold it, your tone calms because you have stopped auditioning for the past. You formalize a protocol that stabilizes the new attractor long enough for matter to take notice. The 72-hour Coherence Lock. Hour 024. Declare one essential behavior that the loop cannot survive without and remove its oxygen. Not forever. 72 hours. You do not bargain. You replace the behavior's payoff with a clean equivalent. Water for comfort, sunlight for anesthesia, a 10-minute walk for the scroll's counterfeit belonging. You keep the instrument fed so the old candy loses its spell. Hour 24:48. Flood precision. Every doorway you pass through is a bell that calls you back to the body. Hand to sternum. 5 in, 5 out. 11 seconds of raw sensation when the limbic choir tries to reclaim the stage. You journal like an engineer, not a diarist. Event, state, choice, result. No adjectives. Adjectives are where the loop smuggles myth back into the math. Hour 48:72. Build forward pressure. Replace avoidance with approach. One conversation you've been postponing, done in 10 sentences of clean nouns and verbs. One room reorganized until it reflects the vector, not the loop. 1 hour devoted to the skill the future version of you spends all day using. The field notices momentum that does not argue. Across these hours, you practice what the ancients and the neuroscientists both know. State precedes story. You do not demand the mind to believe anything while the body is still negotiating yesterday's weather. You win the body first. Sleep within a consistent window so the circadian metronome aligns with choice. Protein and salt early so the limbic system stops pleading for a sugar crown. Stillness windows at predictable intervals so the prefrontal light is available when needed. None of this is glamorous. All of this is sacred, not because it flatters you, but because it makes you precise. Choice also requires exit ramps. The loop does not only circle, it escalates. It knows how to take you from a stray ember to a forest fire in 4 well-rehearsed moves. You map those moves. You write them like a flight checklist. Trigger, story, chemistry, behavior. You do not attempt to stop the chain at the end. You interrupt at the beginning with friction so gentle it looks like mercy. Splash water on your face. Change physical altitude by standing on a chair for 30 seconds to remind the body that gravity can be negotiated. Speak one sentence out loud that names the weather in you. There is a storm moving through the chest. Phenomena hate being named when they are trying to impersonate you. The mask slips. The signal returns. You examine identity because the loop hides their best. I am the one who was a prayer you repeated without knowing. You retire identities that were actually emergency strategies wearing medals. The savior, the ghost, the provocateur, the patient saint. You do not strip yourself naked. You trade uniforms. You choose an identity with room to breathe. I am the one who keeps clean agreements with the future. You pin that sentence over the desk where your mouth used to keep a shrine to yesterday. When choice feels distant, you borrow from the body again. Posture as prophecy. Spine like a tuning rod. Jaw unlatched. Eyes soft. It isn't performance, it's physics. Configuration dictates computation. The machine thinks differently when you sit like this. You begin to sense the Markov blanket between you and the world, the membrane through which signals pass and meaning is synthesized. The loop kept the blanket opaque, thick with old priors. You thin it with presence, not paranoia. You allow more reality in without surrendering authorship. This is not hypervigilance, it is skilled permeability. You are available to novelty without selling your nervous system to every passing storm. Choice has a sound. It's quiet, like a room that has just been tuned. People hear it when you enter. Some will lean closer, some will flinch. Do not read this as omen or accusation. It is simply resonance sorting its partners. You are not leaving anyone behind. You are leaving a frequency band. If they tune, you'll meet again. If they don't, you bless the distance so the field can do its work without your interference. And then the click arrives. The faint, definitive sound of a phase transition. The scaffold loosens. The air tastes different. You realize you've walked an entire afternoon without having to rescue or perform or disappear. The absence of the old noise is not emptiness. It is usable silence. In that silence, a corridor brightens, not narrow now but wide, ribbed with light like the inside of a living cathedral. You step, the floor hums like a loom waking up, and a new pattern begins to appear, the first honest fabric you have ever chosen to wear. You discover that timelines don't arrive, they entrain. Like metronomes on the same table, separate rhythms become one when the surface underneath them can carry the tiny vibrations they trade. Your surface is attention stabilized into coherence. Your vector is the rhythm you ask reality to meet. When both are steady, probability tilts its face toward you like metal listening for a magnet. You test it in small sanctuaries where noise once reigned. The inbox that used to corrode your morning becomes a field exercise. You open only what serves the declared attractor and let the rest be uncollapsed possibilities until your signal is strong enough to meet them without dilution. The kitchen that used to plot ambushes at midnight becomes a lab for state-first decisions. Water, salt, protein, light simple inputs that steal oxygen from old rituals and feed the nervous system enough voltage to prefer honesty over anesthesia. The conversation that would have spiraled into a courtroom is handled like physics. 10 sentences, nouns and verbs, a boundary drawn as geometry instead of drama. Entrainment is not mystical here. It is engineering. You are choosing what the table is made of. The field responds with pattern density. Synchronicities do not feel like fireworks anymore. They feel like logistics being handled by an intelligence that shares your taste. Doors open at the right angle for your stride. Traffic parts. The sentence you needed to say appears in someone else's mouth and fits your day like a key you didn't remember forging. You resist the superstition that wants to turn this into a performance for a mercurial god. You are not being rewarded, you are being matched. Your brain resists with old contracts. It tries to inject noise so the victory won't count. It whispers that unearned grace requires sabotage to feel symmetrical. You decline the symmetry. You let clean be clean without demanding a bruise. This is how you stop auditing miracles with suspicion until they return to the shadows. Trust is not a mood either. Trust is a distribution you update with evidence. You notice the evidence. You add weight where it belongs. Entrainment accelerates when you align 3 clocks. Breath, language, posture. Breath sets the base frequency. Language quantizes it into meaning the cortex can stabilize without revolt. Posture broadcasts it across the fascia and into the space around you like an antenna that remembers ancient weather. When the clocks agree, rooms behave differently. Arguments lose oxygen before they ignite. Invitations that would have cost you a week of recovery evaporate before they form. The world stops testing you where you have already passed and begins to test you where growth is honest. You begin using error like an instrument. Prediction errors still arrive, surprise interrupts your neat models, and you refuse to call them failure. They are free energy. They are the gap through which novelty enters a system that would happily coast forever on yesterday's answers. You hold the gap open with breath until the body stops pleading for anesthesia. Then you choose, not the heroic choice that performs goodness, the elegant choice that reduces future regret. Elegance leaves fewer echoes to clean up. Entanglement shows up as a quiet scandal. The people who can hear your new frequency start experiencing upgrades they didn't schedule just by standing in your field. You don't announce this. Announcements cheapen the physics, but you see it. Their posture changes mid-sentence. Their eyes clear. They confess a boundary they thought would cost them love, and watch love survive the shock. You are not the cause. You are the condition. Conditions matter. Moss grows where the air stays wet. Courage grows where permission hums like a tuning fork in the wall. You practice refusal as an art form, not the brittle no that carries resentment like a splinter, but the clean no that points to a larger yes. The loop will offer you premium temptations, now ethical replicas of your old anesthetics, complete with gold trim and spiritual language. You study their payoff curves and see the same shape underneath, a short peak of relief followed by a trough of self-betrayal. Entrainment cannot stabilize around betrayal. You pick the slow burn that leaves you intact. The body becomes an oracle you can finally trust. It stops yelling because you've started listening. Sensations arrive as precise data instead of sabotage. Pressure here means speak. Heaviness there means rest. The sudden brightness in the sternum means the room is telling you the truth. You will still misread sometimes. That is allowed. You correct course in minutes, not months. The apology you couldn't form last year exits your mouth now without theatrics. The gratitude you used to perform lands as a bell in the chest. Bells call ships home. You extend the coherence lock beyond 72 hours without calling it a streak. Streaks beg for collapse. You call it governance. Governance doesn't panic when a day bends under weather. It reallocates. You can skip a ritual and remain ritualized because the identity running the system no longer needs the performance to know itself. I am the one who keeps clean agreements with the future, has migrated from ink on paper to policy in the bones. And then the air thickens with a familiar electricity, phase transition weather again, but larger. You feel the loom adjusting its tension, the way a harpist tightens a string before asking it to carry higher notes. Probability curves bend like reeds around you. You are not the storm, you are the clearing. What passes through you keeps its shape. What cannot hold coherence dissolves without litigation. A hush arrives that isn't silence, it's capacity. Inside that hush, the future thrones itself without fanfare, and you feel the next instruction touch the back of your neck like cool fire. You feel the instruction like a pressure differential at the crown, not a voice, not a thought, an alignment request from the architecture itself. Threshold weather. You've prepared the instrument, stabilized the vector, entrained the nearby probabilities. Now the field wants aperture, not bigger, cleaner. Aperture determines resolution. You consent. You name the crossing without spectacle. The Vortex Eye. Not a portal in the sky, but a precision in awareness that stops spinning and looks through the spin. The loop always relied on angular momentum, stories whipping fast enough to blur into inevitability. The eye cancels that turn with ruthless stillness and exact naming. You don't chant, you configure. You begin with bearings, because orientation is medicine. North, breath in 5, out 5, through the nose until the heart draws a steady lantern in the sternum. East, posture that admits truth, pelvis under you, spine stacked, jaw unlatched, eyes soft, not hunting, not retreating. South, language that refuses theater, 10 nouns, 10 verbs, no adjectives, describing what is actually occurring inside and around you. West, a boundary remembered as geometry, not anger. The compass holds. The room responds by becoming honest. Then the protocol. 3 concentric rings you step through without moving. Ring 1 to spin. You let the stories arrive like weather, and you refuse to be their sky. You sit at the center and feel the centrifugal pull trying to fling you into performance. Explain, apologize, rescue, dominate, disappear. You do none. You count 11 heartbeats with awareness pinned to sensation, not narrative. Somewhere around heartbeat 7, the limbic choir loses the pitch. By heartbeat 11, the wind inside the stories dies, and the objects that were orbiting your attention clink to the floor like coins. The eye opens a few millimeters. Ring 2, denoise. You identify 3 signals. Signal from body, pressure, heat, texture. Signal from mind, proposals, predictions, bargaining. Signal from field, convergences that need only a yes. You assign each to its proper channel without cross-fading. Body is allowed to be intense without being in charge. Mind is allowed to propose without impersonating law. Field is allowed to lead without demanding worship. The channels separate like colors in a prism, and coherence stops wasting voltage on translation errors. Ring 3 decision. Not the brittle decision that pleads for certainty, the elegant decision that reduces future regret. You ask one question: which choice keeps me available to truth tomorrow? Availability beats victory. Availability beats image. Availability beats being right. The answer is usually quieter than pride can hear. You tilt your head a fraction, and pride slides off like rain from oiled stone. The eye clicks wider. You feel the Markov blanket thinning again, the membrane that mediates between you and the world becoming selectively transparent. The loop used opacity to smuggle old priors into every reading. The eye uses translucence to receive novelty without drowning in it. You become permeable exactly where permeability is intelligence. To feedback that refines your vector, to beauty that recalibrates your scale, to grief that rinses rust from the hinges of your speech. You do not become a sieve, you become a lens. People react. Some tighten, some bloom. The ones who tighten are not wrong. They are simply hearing their own contracts expire in your field. You bless them without performing benevolence. Blessing is non-interference with warmth. You do not rescue anyone from the mathematics of their choices. You also do not throw anyone into storms to teach them lessons time would have taught without your theatrics. You align with the physics. Conditions shape outcomes. You keep your conditions clean. You test the eye in heat, not in retreat. Not in the meditation chair alone, but mid-conversation when the old theatrical script hands you your favorite monologue. The tongue itches to perform. The chest remembers the courtroom. You run the rings in seconds. De-spin, de-noise, decision. You choose the 10-sentence geometry instead of the opera. The result is not cinematic, it is effective. Relief arrives without applause, which is the only kind that lasts. Prediction error visits with a gift. An opportunity you once would have chased now turns toward you, unbidden, a call, an opening, a resource precise to your declared attractor and free of the old hidden price. The temptation is to lunge, to collect, to prove. You do not lunge, you stabilize, you check. Does this require me to abandon myself to keep it? If yes, you decline cleanly. If no, you say yes in a tone that does not tremble. The eye stays open because you refuse to buy a future with the currency of yesterday. Identity shifts again, quieter this time. Not a costume change, a density change. You become less edible to systems that feed on volatility, more nourishing to ecosystems that metabolize coherence into culture. Entanglement makes itself useful. Rooms self-sort around your presence. Conversations find their sentence. Projects reveal their true cost early, so you can choose with eyes untricked by glamour. Glamour is friction posing as light. You can tell the difference now. Light carries information, glamour carries hunger. You memorialize the crossing with a ritual that creates no shrine to itself. A small object on the desk, a key-shaped shard of metal, a loop of thread, a stone with a hole through it, touched once each morning to remind the body what it learned. Loops can break, and the shard can become a key. You do not post about it. Mystery loses voltage when paraded. Voltage is needed for what comes next, because the loom is tightening again. You can feel it in the way silence gains weight without becoming heavy, in the way time thins until minutes get sharp and honest. The eye invites a deeper cut through the oldest contract of all, the one that kept you loyal to suffering so you would be legible to those who taught you love as ache. The field is not asking you to betray anyone. It is asking you to stop betraying the future, to stay fluent in a language you have already outgrown. You stand still. The room tilts a fraction, as it did at the beginning, but this time the axis is inside your bones. The air arranges around it without argument. You breathe once, twice, a third time that feels like a signature. The eye is open, the vector is bright, and the fabric ahead trembles like something about to remember its original pattern when called by its true name. You approach the oldest ledger, the one written before you could write, where love was itemized as ache, and belonging was purchased with the currency of self-abandonment. The loop hid here because the math was sacred, To question it felt like betrayal. You do not betray anyone. You audit the equation. Begin with the body, because ancestors ransom themselves in tissue when language fails them. A weight behind the sternum that never matched the room, a clench in the jaw that arrived 3 decades early, a reflex to smile when danger enters so no one will startle. These are signatures. You place your palm over the sternum and count 11 heartbeats, not as a trick, but as jurisdiction. This is your court. You are allowed to examine the evidence without sentencing anyone to exile. The pressure loosens by a fraction. Pressure loosens when the judge returns. You name the contract with clean nouns and verbs. To be loved, I must ache. To belong, I must be useful. To stay safe, I must predict and prevent. You do not decorate. Adjectives are where myth sneaks into law. Then you ask one question that sounds like a bell. Who paid this price first so I would think it normal? A face rises, then another, then a house full of the living and the dead, rehearsing the same choreography on different stages. Grief comes like weather. You let it rain. Grief is rust, leaving the hinges of a door you need to open without breaking. You take the ritual out of superstition and into physics. Epigenetics is not a ghost story, it is a memory system. Methyl groups carry warnings your lineage bought with pain. Their caution kept you alive. Their overreach kept you small. You honor both with one act. Differentiation. The Vortex Eye holds the spin still long enough for you to read what the chemical post-it notes actually say. Most say, watch the fire. None say, be the ash. The distinction frees voltage you didn't know you were leasing to old alarms. Then you build the altar no one can vandalize. Posture as inheritance. You stand as if the next generation is copying you in a mirror they cannot avoid. Because they are. Because someone always is. Spine like a tuning rod, chin soft, shoulders wide enough for truth, not for performance. You say, quietly and out loud, I choose to be the end of this equation, not the end of the people who believed it of the equation. Language rearranges the room, fascia hears vows, electrons worship boundary. You feel the click, not dramatic, definite. Unbinding requires a clean exchange. If you remove the loop's currency and do not replace the payoff, the nervous system will steal it back in the night. You list the payoffs the ancestral contract purchased. Predictability, permission, identity, a choreography. The body could dance without thinking. You replace predictability with coherence rituals that work under weather. You replace permission with a council of the wise 3 living names you can text with one true sentence and get a mirror instead of a stage. You replace identity with a vow. I am the one who keeps clean agreements with the future, even when the past wants an encore. You replace choreography with presence. Presence learns steps faster than fear ever could. Forgiveness appears, stripped of theater. It is not a performance to prove your goodness to ghosts. It is a physics problem. Enmeshment is friction, and friction wastes voltage you require for selection. You forgive to reduce entropy in the system, so you can spend energy on building instead of on noise cancellation. The heart understands and stops prosecuting trials that never find verdicts, because the witnesses are all mirrors. You write letters you will never send 10 sentences each, nouns and verbs, no adjectives naming what happened, what it cost, what you choose now. You read them once in a voice that does not shake, because you are not asking for permission. You are issuing new policy. Then you burn them or bury them or fold them into a book you intend to outgrow. The ritual is not magic. The ritual is a container, so the chemistry can complete without taking hostages. Entanglement shifts texture. The people who could only meet you in ache find you less edible. Some will accuse your calm of cruelty because their metric for love is turbulence. You do not defend your weather. Defense would re-enter the courtroom you dismantled. You keep a chair open at your table with a bowl and a cup and no conditions, and you refuse to change your shape to get anyone to sit. Love is not a contortion. It is a field where shapes can remain themselves without losing connection. The field answers by rerouting inheritance. Children, students, strangers in checkout lines begin practicing boundaries they didn't learn at home because your presence normalizes them like gravity normalizes falling. You do not claim credit. Credit is a loop's appetite in ceremonial clothing. You claim responsibility to stay tuned so the broadcast remains clean. The work is not glamorous, the work is governance. Governance is devotion without theater. Then the dream arrives that doesn't feel like a dream. You are standing in a room with a loom made of light. Threads enter from behind you, voices, hands, weather, and you see how often you braided ache into the pattern. Because ache was the only thread that felt strong enough to hold. You reach instead for a thread that looks fragile, quiet, coherent, thin as a promise, and it doesn't break, it multiplies. It brightens the others without bleaching their color. You wake with a sentence ringing like a bell struck inside bone. Belonging without self-betrayal is not a miracle, it is our baseline. The morning is ordinary, in a way that feels like a new continent. Dishes, emails, a hallway conversation. Ordinary is where revolutions survive. You touch the key-shaped shard on the desk and it is not a relic, it is a tool. The eye holds. The contract is ash, and ahead, the corridor turns slightly, revealing stairs of light that do not climb into heaven. They descend into the engine room of matter, where reality asks for engineers who can work without worshipping their own reflections. You step, carrying your lineage like a lantern instead of a chain. You enter the engine room without ceremony, valves of breath, dials of attention, flywheels of choice turning under steady light. The myth of manifestation dissolves here, engineering remains. The loom does not respond to desire spikes or theatrical affirmations. It responds to stable parameters sustained through weather. You set them. Parameter 1, energy budget. The loop spent voltage on noise, rumination, rescue, rehearsal of imaginary trials with imaginary juries. You close those accounts. You allocate wattage to 3 lines only. Coherence, so signal survives transit. Craft, so signal acquires form. And care, so form doesn't corrode in your hands. Coherence is your metronome, heart-breath alignment, posture as antenna, language as coordinate system. Craft is the tool, write, code, teach, heal, build, negotiate whatever skill turns signal into shareable geometry. Care is the lubricant, hydration, sleep, food, sunlight, movement, because friction is what ruins machines that were designed well, but maintained poorly. Parameter 2, throughput. You stop hoarding ideas like precious ore. Ideas oxidize in airless vaults. You run them through pipelines. Capture, clarify, commit. Capture, a small card, a voice memo, 10 words that a future you can recognize without romance. Clarify, what is the minimum viable form this wants? Paragraph, prototype, conversation. Commit, a calendar square that puts mass under the trajectory so gravity can find it. You learn that unfinished is heavier than failed. You let more fail cleanly so more can finish beautifully. Parameter 3, latency. Not everything accelerates under pressure. Some systems require a calm delay to self-organize. You stop ripping seeds open to make them sprout faster. You use the eye to determine whether a stuck point wants force or silence. Force when fear is impersonating prudence. Silence when complexity is negotiating new coherence under the threshold of your hearing. You grant the system its gestation and stop calling patience passivity. Patience is oxygen for emergent order. You deploy protocols that compress chaos into action without bleaching the depth from the work. The 3, 10, 30 pulse. 3 minutes to sketch the core, 10 minutes to rough the edges, 30 minutes to move one piece into the world where it can be tested by reality instead of fantasies of rejection or applause. The clean ask. When a collaboration calls, you articulate constraints like architecture scope, budget, deadline, definition of done 10 sentences, nouns and verbs. Boundaries are kindness. Ambiguity is a slow cruelty that pretends to be lenient. The debrief without drama. After each push, 3 lines: what stabilized us, what introduced noise, what small change would reduce future regret. Improvement becomes ritual. Ritual becomes culture. Culture matters because you are not engineering alone. Entanglement is a design constraint as real as gravity. Your field entrains the team, their fields entrain you. You choose collaborators whose nervous systems can hold novelty without demanding a villain when surprise arrives. You normalize coherence checks before decisions that would deplete the organism. Hand to sternum, breath to 5, 11 seconds of raw sensation. Then the question, which option preserves truth? Availability tomorrow. Availability beats image. Again, ethics is not a separate department. It is the shape of your attractor. Systems built on self-betrayal wear out their operators and call the wreckage a badge of honor. You decline heroics. Heroics are what we invent when we refuse to design conditions where ordinary coherence can win. You design conditions. You make calm contagious without making it fragile. You keep the Markov blanket selective. Too much permeability and the machine drowns in noise. Too little and the machine worships its own echo. You install gates, input windows in which you intentionally expose the work to feedback that hurts and helps in equal measure. Quiet windows in which you forbid unvetted opinion so the nascent pattern can thicken without harassment. You teach the team the difference between iteration and oscillation. Iteration moves forward with small corrections. Oscillation burns fuel in place and calls it passion. Passion without direction is just heat. You need light. Scaling arrives as a test, disguised as a compliment. The world asks for more product, more presence, more access to the field you've stabilized. The loop wants to say yes to all and convert your nervous system back into a factory that pays with its own marrow. You choose architecture over appetite. You codify what is actually yours to do. The decisions no one else can make without your pattern recognition. The language no one else can coin without your voice. Print the rituals no one else can hold without your spine. Then you document everything else until replacement is an act of love, not abandonment. Failure evolves, not catastrophic collapse. Your coherent safety nets prevent that, but clean boundary encounters with reality. You build metrics that measure what matters rather than what flatters. Metrics that ask, are we reducing future regret? Are we increasing truth? Availability. Is the signal-to-noise ratio improving in the rooms we touch? If a win breaks one of these, you do not bank it. You treat it as a counterfeit that will cost interest you cannot afford later. The team learns to celebrate alignment over volume. Volume will come as a byproduct, not as a god. A silence gathers that is not emptiness, it's capacity. The engine hum loses its metallic edge and acquires warmth, like the difference between a room heated by a fire and a room heated by a story about a fire. You are no longer performing future. You are inhabiting the coordinates where future arrives because the present was tuned to receive it. The loom threads smoother, the fabric thickens, the pattern keeps finding a way to stay beautiful without becoming precious. And then, again, the click phase transition where the tightening strings for higher notes. A corridor opens onto a balcony that wasn't there yesterday, and below it you see the city of your choices lit by a geometry you recognize as your own. Not ego, ownership. The field invites finality. Will you seal this? Not with spectacle, with a vow that costs you the last counterfeit comfort. The air tastes like metal and rain. You touch the shard on the desk. It is no longer a shard. It is a key. The staircase of light descends one level more, toward the chamber where names are minted and released like comets. You breathe once, exact, and walk toward the place where you will say yours without flinching. You arrive at the chamber without doors, the one that has been approaching you since the first clean breath, since the first refusal to buy the future with yesterday's currency. There is no throne here, no choir, no spectacle, only a pressure-like altitude and a quiet like depth. The loom hums beneath the floor, and the Vortex Eye holds steady, a still aperture through which reality becomes readable. The work behind you is not a resume, it is a resonance. The room is tuned to it. This is where naming ceases to be biography and becomes geometry. You know the danger of names. The loop used them as cages, savior, ghost, special, doomed. Each costume brought predictability and charged you interest in self-forgetting. You will not repeat that ceremony with better lighting. Here a name is a vector, compressed into syllables, a callable frequency, a contract you can keep under weather. To reach it, you let language fall through sieves until only what can bear load survives. First, you shed theater. The body knows the difference. Performance tightens the jaw and lifts the chest like a billboard. Truth softens the face and sinks the breath lower until the belly and spine find the same horizon. Hand to sternum, 5 in, 5 out. 11 heartbeats of raw sensation as the last bits of adrenaline plead for one more monologue. You do not audition, you do not rehearse, you configure, then you reconcile paradox, because the field does not print names that cannot carry opposites. You hold these in the same palm: tenderness without collapse, authority without violence, precision without cruelty, patience without delay. The nervous system tries to split into either or. You keep it braided. Coherence is a rope that refuses to fray under tension. The chamber listens for that braid. The braid appears. Now you ask the only question that makes sense here. What can I vow that will still be true when I am tired, praised, blamed, loved, ignored? Praise and blame are weather. You need climate. Climate is policy in the bones. You search your ledgers, the 72-hour locks, the triads, the debriefs without drama, and you surface the sentence that has behaved like steel in every room. I keep clean agreements with the future. It is not poetry. It is load-bearing. You place it like a beam across the chamber. The field answers with evidence. Scenes replay, not as nostalgia, as proof. The message you delayed until your tone could be geometry. The invitation you declined without building a villain. The apology you issued in 10 nouns and verbs, and the corridor you walked without demanding a medal. Evidence turns vows into fact. Fact vibrates at a frequency glamour cannot counterfeit. The pressure changes, altitude becomes air. The name emerges not as lyric but as function. It is the designation of a role the organism can sustain. Signal keeper, pattern smith, gate of coherence. Choose the phrasing that your mouth can say without flinching, and that your calendar can corroborate on a Tuesday afternoon when no one is watching. You whisper it. The whisper is louder than any speech you have ever given, because it does not ask to be believed. It simply runs. Sealing requires cost, not public sacrifice. Public spectacle is cheap. Cost is private renunciation of your favorite counterfeit. You place it on the floor like metal. Maybe it is the loop's premium lure, being indispensable, being the cleverest, being the one who bleeds artfully, so everyone calls it love. You exchange it for a tool. Documentation, delegation, deletion. What leaves feels like status. What arrives is capacity. The loom speeds slightly and steadies. Systems sing when friction is named and removed. You install 3 safeguards so the seal does not become theater. Guard 1, a quiet audit. Weekly, 10 minutes, no adjectives. Agreements made, agreements kept, agreements retired. If your mouth is writing checks your nervous system cannot cash, you reduce scope, not integrity. Integrity shrinks quantity before it sells its shape. Guard 2, a living counsel. 3 names you can text a single line. Am I keeping the climate? And receive mirrors instead of performances. 1 elder in craft, 1 peer in governance, 1 novice whose questions keep you from building a temple to difficulty. Guard 3, a fail-safe ritual. When glamour returns dressed as destiny, you run the rings of the eye in public. De-spin, de-noise, decide. Calm in heat is a sacrament. You let rooms watch you choose. Contagion does the rest. Entanglement thickens in a new way. The field begins to notarize agreements around you. Projects consent to be finished. People discover their own names by standing in the radius of yours, not because you tell them, because your climate makes amnesia less profitable. You do not curate this. Curation is control in ceremonial clothing. You curate conditions only. Clarity, cadence, care. A final test approaches in the shape of a gift. It fits your history and flatters your wound. It offers expansion if you will quietly betray the climate to grab it. The offer is not evil. It is mathematics verifying your seal. You look through the eye and ask the only question that matters. Will this keep me available to truth tomorrow? The no is clean and small. Small no's save empires. You decline without sermon. The gift sublimes into something truer. Time, silence, a sentence that will become a key for someone you will never meet. The chamber changes temperature. The key in your pocket stops being metaphor. The shard you carried becomes a door handle. You touch it and feel the loom answer with a tone that arranges dust into order. The name sits where your old reflexes used to live and does their jobs better. You are not larger, you are clearer. Clear carries further than loud. You turn back toward the corridor, not to leave but to implement. Implementation is worship here. The staircase of light does not ascend, it moves level with the floor, a runway rather than a ladder. You step onto it, a field of clean agreements wrapped in a human nervous system that can hold voltage without worshipping pain. Ahead, the city of your choices wakes to a climate it can finally breathe. The loom asks only one thing now: keep the seal by using it. You walk the runway of implementation as if it had always been part of your bones, because it has. Because destiny is not a calendar date but a climate. Your climate held steady until the world can breathe inside it. You do not summon trumpets. You let the hum of the loom speak for you, even, warm, exact. Where you once argued with storms, you now configure rooms. Where you once rehearsed speeches, you now keep agreements. Where you once slept inside a circle, you now travel by vector. You bless the ordinary because it is the only place the miraculous survives. A door opens, you enter without performance. A boundary is needed, you draw it without thunder. An apology belongs to the air. You give it in 10 nouns and verbs, and the air clears. The eye remains open not because you guard it with fear, but because your life is arranged to make openness inexpensive. The loop still wanders by, rattling souvenirs and offering crowns purchased with yesterday's currency. It finds no buyer. Your commerce is coherence. You teach without announcing a curriculum. People acclimate to your weather and discover they can breathe truth without choking on it. They mistake it for something you gave them. You correct the myth by modeling the math. Conditions over charisma, governance over glamour, small noes that keep vast yeses clean. Entanglement becomes culture, culture becomes shelter, shelter becomes launch. You return, finally, to the place where the signal first appeared, the seam between breath and moment, and you listen. The tone that found you has not changed. You have. It sounds lower, rounder, nearer to the center of the chest, as if the instrument had grown a second resonance chamber. You answer not with vows but with use. The email you send in a tone that steadies a week. The meal you cook that convinces a body it is allowed to be a home. The document you write that becomes scaffolding for a stranger you will never meet. Implementation is how prophecy pays its bills. You do not fear sleep anymore because you no longer confuse it with forgetting. Sleep is maintenance, not amnesia. The part of you that once slept inside the loop now sleeps like an engineer, one hand on the console, sensors tuned to the field, ready to wake at the smallest pressure change and call it by its right name. The city of your choices glows like circuitry in the dark, and you are not hypnotized by the light. You are grateful for the power. It is simple now, and simplicity is not small, it is sovereign. You keep clean agreements with the future. You select the vector that leaves you available to truth tomorrow. You remain a climate under weather, and when the old voice asks if you miss the drama that once proved you were alive, you smile the smallest smile and touch the key that is no longer a shard. You turn it once, gently. The door inside the moment opens without a sound. You step through, not to escape, but to continue, and everything steady in you becomes a blessing large enough to inherit the day.